And thank you very much, Tina, Dimitri, Eric, everyone else who was involved in inviting me to come today. I'm very grateful and it's lovely to be here. I'm going to talk really about Israel as a case study for financing the innovative R&D in aging and longevity. We'll begin with this is Israel. It's a really beautiful country. If you haven't been, you should. There's, you can go from the streets of Jerusalem, thousands of years old, the Dead Sea, the fun of Tel Aviv. It is a very rich and multicultural hub, and it's really a fantastic place. It is a tiny, tiny country. And when I say tiny, I mean it takes about 6 hours north to south for you to drive, and about 30, 40 minutes to cross east to west at its narrowest point. And Israel is really a hotspot for tech and innovation. So I work at the UK Israel Tech Hub, which is a team based out of the British Embassy in Tel Aviv. We were founded in 2011 by the former British ambassador, Matthew Gould, and we were set up as a public-private partnership. And we were created to help support and strengthen British companies by providing access to advanced Israeli technologies. That being, there was an understanding that there were technological solutions in Israel that if British corporates were to be aware that they existed, they would be able to strengthen their businesses and contribute significantly to the British economy. And we're active in a variety of sectors: healthcare, smart cities, mobility, cybersecurity, fintech. And in 6 years, our metrics were we built 175 concrete partnerships between Israel and the UK, total deal value of £85 million, and an estimated impact to the British economy of £800 million. So the question is, why did the British government decide to set up a team in Israel only to help provide access to these technologies? What is going on in Israel technologically and in innovation that this was something that we needed to really tap into? So Israel has more startups per capita than anywhere else in the world, / anywhere else in the world outside of Silicon Valley. That ratio sort of fluctuates each year depending on who's leading it. Israel is the highest expenditure of R&D as a percentage of GDP, second globally investments in tech, a huge hub for for multinational R&D centers. Interestingly, Israel used to lead as the number of scientific articles published per scientist in academia. And then that has switched in recent years to being the number of patents, which shows a shift as people have moved their skill set away from academia and more towards industry. And when we look at the healthcare sector specifically, Israel is number one with the number of medical device patents per capita and number two for biopharmaceuticals. And when you start looking at the business numbers, it's really exceptional. In 2017, there were $2.2 billion in exits in healthcare alone. And of the $1.2 billion invested, $1 billion came from foreign funds, which really shows the significant interest in what's going on in Israel. Now, in the healthcare space, there's 100% electronic medical records. I'm not going to go so far as to say that they've cracked interoperability, but they're certainly further ahead than many other places I've seen. And what that also means is that they have this very rich, comprehensive, what they call cradle-to-the-grave data sets. There's virtually no mobility between the HMOs, so most people stay with the same one that they're born into. And there's more than 25 years now of implementing solutions when it comes to healthcare in IT. Which leads on to the really interesting question of what is the Israeli innovation ecosystem? How is it so rich and varied? How is it financed? And how is it so successful so far? And you can look anywhere and you'll find a dozen different answers. If you read the book Startup Nation, you'll see some explanations there. But really, in my opinion, a lot of it, begins with the military. Israel has mandatory military service. Men need to serve for 3 years, women for 2 years. And as warfare becomes increasingly technological, this becomes a training ground for the core skills and competencies of the technologies required in the military, which are also the same technologies that are driving society today. When we look at healthcare, when we look at mobility, at any of these areas, especially when we look at the deep tech end, a lot of what's going on is big data analytics, AI, machine learning, computer vision. and data security, of course. And these are really, where a lot of people will hone their skills in their early 20s, developing this competency, and will then go off to industry looking for the next challenge for them to address. So one of the interesting things is that innovators, for example, in healthcare, very rarely come from a healthcare background. They don't come from healthcare and say, this is a problem I want to solve. They have a hammer and they're looking for the nail. And their hammer is big data analytics skills. So they're looking around for some solution that they can really sink their teeth into, that's going to drive them, that's going to give them a challenge, and hopefully that's going to be very lucrative at the end of it. But that's really where a lot of this interest comes, is them looking to solve a problem with their skill set. There is the tie-in then between academia. There is an abundance of venture capitalists in Israel. There is an awful lot of money floating around. There is the role that multinationals play. More than 350 multinationals have R&D centers in Israel. They are all looking to tap into the ecosystem. It's now creating a bit of a problem as new players such as Amazon come in and are doubling or tripling salaries in the going markets and creating a lot of issues on that side of things. And there's a lot done around the accelerators. And there's an awful lot of accelerators, some of which are less good and some of which are really contributing significantly. And I'm going to come on now to the accelerators and the role of government. And when we look at government, one of the main bodies driving, or the main body driving, is the Israel Innovation Authority. Now, okay, sorry, I got my slides confused there. I just wanted to talk about this point, and this drives into it, is I sort of see the four sides of the longevity challenge. You have the challenge of today and the challenge of tomorrow. And the challenge of today I think of as my parents, put simply, and the challenge of tomorrow is myself. And then within the technological arena, you have your deep tech and you have your applied technologies. Your deep tech is whatever involving AI, machine learning, something complex, and your applied is the Uber or something that's not doing anything incredibly complex necessarily, but is really solving a challenge. Now, the Israel Innovation Authority, to give you some context, it was formerly called the Office of the Chief Scientist. Now, this goes to show how much the Israeli government decided that innovation is going to be core to the strategy of driving sort of the Israeli economy. And there are two main mechanisms I'm going to talk about that really help to push and finance and drive innovation and create a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and of trying regardless of the success. The first is the incubator program. Now, there are 18 incubators around Israel. 10 of these are in healthcare. And the way that the incubator program goes is these are backed by multinational consortia in which 85% of the venture financing is provided by the government. So the consortia, and one of them, for example, is backed by Philips and Teva. They have to finance only the operational costs and 15% of the venture financing, and they get to take 20% to 50% of the equity. So this is, in many cases, not in favor of the entrepreneurs, but especially if you're a first-time entrepreneur, what the structure that they create is fantastic. They create the financing, you have a workspace, a lab space, they've got business development, accounting, legal, everything that you would need. And they will invest up to $1 million per company, and it's a competitive process. But really what is happening here is it's an engine to drive trying. There have been some big successes that have come out of the incubators. There have been many, many failures. When you look at the failures, though, there have been many successes within Israel from entrepreneurs or CEOs that had previously gone through incubator programs. So it also acts essentially as a training ground for entrepreneurship. It gives them the opportunity to try and fail. And the other one, which for some reason is numbered number one as well instead of number two, is a pre-seed startup fund which offers about $55,000 as non-dilutive investments and grants. Now, the reason I'm talking about this now is because at the end of the day, when we look at technology, the issue of longevity and aging is just a use case of technologies mostly. We're looking at things that are invented for one industry, one market, one person, and we can apply them to anyone else. an example of this, and I'll be coming on, is Orcam, a device that was invented. It sits on glasses. I wish I'd put it into my presentation. It sits on glasses. It's an AI-driven camera that was originally invented for blind people. What it does is it whispers in your ear. There's a little microphone at the back of it, a camera at the front, and it will identify who's in front of you, what's going on. You'll hold a £5 note in front, and it will tell you it's a £5 note. It will tell you that this is, these are Cheerios and these are cornflakes, and it enables people to start engaging in a world that they were previously unengaged in. And so all these companies are all inventing for one market, but at the end of the day, when we look at longevity, it's very broad. Sorry, I just want to see how I'm doing for time. And then I want to talk as well, jumping from innovation to a little bit earlier, to BIREX. BIREX is the Britain-Israel Research and Academic Exchange Partnership. It's essentially an academic research collaboration program between Israel and the UK. I'm aware that there are professors from King's that have been given grants, from Oxford, from Cambridge, from Queen's and Belfast. Now, BIREX was established, I believe, in 2010, and its initial fund was an £8 million fund, and it was called BIREX Regeneration. And this goes to show, I think is exactly what I was just saying, that at the end of the day, it's a use case. You know, regeneration, looking at stem cells, and now it's called BIREX Aging. The next fund is BIREX Aging. Has it really shifted that much? I'm not entirely sure. I think there's probably significant overlap, because at the end of the day, you know, we were looking at tissue regeneration towards addressing aging and longevity, and how we ensure that people can enter the third age, you know, as good as the second. Now, they've just announced, I think a few weeks ago, the latest dispersal of funds. That's £3 million that have been given out to research projects between Israel and the UK in these areas: vascular diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, macular. And one of the core parts of it is bringing on partners such as the British Heart Foundation, Parkinson's UK, multiple sclerosis. They've also brought in Diabetes UK. And this is really an important part of driving what's happening here. Now, at the end of the day, what they're financing here is kind of blue skies research, but a little bit more than that. That being that, you know, it's not at the stage where you've really got to be able to demonstrate that you're going to develop something that will be patented. It's understanding that innovations come from all sorts of directions, and if you finance things in certain directions, you're going to sort of sprout up 1,000 new ideas. So the bottom line really is that in Israel, the government helps significantly to take on the risk of innovation. And it does this to create technologies, and it does this to create entrepreneurs, regardless of their success, which is really a very large point of what happens there. The culture in Israel is very much one that it's better to try and fail than not to try at all. You would never go into any meeting, interview, anything in life and try to present yourself as having not failed spectacularly at something. That's really what they're very interested in. Your failures are where you learn the most. And when I say that, you know, in England, you would never dare put on your CV all of your failures, for them that's something just a little bit surprising and something they don't quite understand. So it really is very much a culture of risk and of facing risk, and that being an acceptable thing. I want to give a few noteworthy mentions to wrap things up. One is a non-profit called Milbat. Now, what Milbat does is Milbat works to invent technologies where there's no solution. Now, they're in the assistive technology space. And if you have some sort of issue, whether it's, you know, related to being old, young, disabled, abled, whatever it is, if you need some sort of assistive technology and you can't find that it exists, they will invent it for you. And they have an army of about 600 volunteer engineers. Part of the system is also one of Israel's largest companies, Israel Aircraft Industries, which is a defense company, and their employees are allowed to work on pet projects using their engineering capabilities for Milbat, also using the IAI's machining, tooling, everything that they've got. And they will invent, whether it needs to be deep tech, something advanced, or something that is really very manual. So if they need to invent something very complex for you, or one of the very simple things I saw there was essentially a heavy weight that attaches to a pen so that someone with Parkinson's can sign their signature pretty normally without their tremor coming up through it. And these sorts of things. In the city of Beersheba in the south, they have designed their city app in partnership with a group, with a cohort of people over the age of 60, with the understanding that young people would learn to use the app no matter what. What they needed to do was to come up, whether it's the design, the color schemes, whatever it was, if they wanted a population of their city to be engaging in the culture, the opportunities, and a lot of these are promoted through the city app, then they had to engage these people in the design of the app, otherwise they were never going to be part of the city and the community. On the need of technology, I just wanted to point this. I was visiting my parents this weekend. This is their applied technology for using the Netflix at home. And I'm aware that I've got to wrap things up. I just want to give this very quick example of what happens if you don't have a spouse or children that will write notes for you or will come over and help very quickly. And this is a very quick example I'll give. An organization called Door le Door, which means generation to generation. And they were engaged by the municipality of Tel Aviv that had an issue of old people, of an aging population, calling them up and needing help with things. And what Door le Door did is they created a platform technology called Help on the Way, in which someone who doesn't have children in the same city, whose children work hours, whatever, if they need a light bulb changed, if they need something done at home, if they need someone to play chess with, because that's what they want to do and they haven't found their right partner, the app will connect them with someone young, someone within the ages, I think, usually of 20 to 40, who will receive a notification, like Uber or whatever, and will go over to change the light bulb, to have a chat, to do whatever is needed around the house. And one of the things they've done is they've created an entire community of this. Shown here is a holiday gathering they did. And one of the interesting things that's come from this is, what the people that go to this are the pairs, the buddies. And actually what's come out of it is a whole community of people who didn't know that there were others in the same position as them. This aging population have made friends, they're laughing, they're dating. You see 80-year-olds at these events hitting on each other. For the first time, they're around each other and all sorts, and it's absolutely fantastic. So I will wrap up at that point. And thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Tina, for inviting me. If anyone has any questions or would like to be in touch, then please do.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much, Karen. So, we have our final...